Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Phil Rice, and we're just having a random catch up with my good friend, buddy, pal, colleague, and just a good friend, Brian T. Collins. Brian, brother, man, how the are you?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I tend like to create a boundary within my own mental realm of capacity is not to listen to news.
Yeah.
So,
Are you talking about mainstream news specifically?
Most news, because the job of mainstream, but also alternative, is to constantly peddle fear or contraction of intent, right? So I'm willfully creating the capacity to filter myself from as much talking head opinions as I can, because I really understand that, basically people keep talking about World War III. No, World War III was the Cold War, right? Yeah. World War IV is a spiritual, energetic battle against the mind, and one of those beachheads that's being rolled out is the fracturing on how cognitive ability can basically discern logic and reason. So if you look at all these things, this is why in the weaponized movement of inclusion, which basically legally something that's inclusive means exclusive of the other, right? So it's a separation. So through that weaponized, feelings are being elevated as truth. And this is a huge problem, systemic problem, why I really don't want to get involved with a lot of truth movement stuff that I've seen over the last 10 years, is the onslaught of fake news, not only from mainstream legacy, bought and paid for state propaganda, but it's the same alternate troller behaviors that's going on in the alternate media. And specifically, this has been a big issue in recent years of astroturfing, creating false fake movements to kind of steer, information. So this is what I mean by, I'm willfully keeping myself, present to my natural surroundings out in nature, and really not getting involved in all of these things like, these freedom things that are going on. And it doesn't mean that I'm actually turning my head, but I just realized as this general awakening happens, there's also areas of co-optedness that's steering narratives into basically cherry-picked half-truth narratives. So as you know, I'm a big fan of logic and the ability to be able to discern information. So that's why I'm really just cherishing my time to spend time, in the studio, making music and working on that kind of stuff and getting those things out, as opposed to constantly regurgitating alternate news on, platforms like BitChute and those kind of things. So that's how I'm doing. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously it's getting pretty active. Like I've got a finger in a few fingers in a few pies, and I'm conscious of my participation and what I expose myself to, as well. There is that great thing quote. What is it? Go if you want to go swimming in a dirty pool, expect to get a couple of stains on you. And that sludge, I've been exposed to that sludge in the past, and that has taken work because to clean that up, and that has provided some unpleasant sort of byproduct. However, the reality is that the sludge is on the march. The sludge is getting pushed back, and we're seeing that quite actively. But yeah, I'm also conscious, like, it's funny, on my phone, I've got I've got probably the most propagandized news agency as a quick dial on my Brave browser. And for some reason, it just won't do it. And I've tried it a few times. I thought, I'll just quickly check the headlines, and it just won't go to it. And I'm like going, thanks, Brave. Thanks for that. It was like a moment of like, actually, you know what? I'm quite happy to do without exposing myself to that. I'm very grateful for those who are on, say, who are still exposing themselves to that information and are able to sort of like share it in a different format rather than having to go to the source. But yeah, exposure to this stuff is it's detrimental to your health on many levels. And but you're right, I think we kind of got to choose our battles when it comes to what we expose ourselves to. And people have got varying levels of sensitivity. I'm not opposed to rocking along to these protests going on right now as well. I went
needed.
to, what's that?
Right? It's all needed, right? I don't want to interrupt you, but it leads to an uncomfortable realization of logic that all consciousness is valid.
Yeah.
Even if it's wrong, or even if it's misguided or whatever, all consciousness has an element of validity to it. So I mean, where people are, because it takes all kinds to make a world. So where people are is according to where they are, and whatever logos of the constructive mind is creating that whole thing of reactionary. So at that level, yeah, it needs the physical pushback, but also at the same time it needs also those who are able to actually sit back and discern, okay, well, how can these things actually be steered or leveraged based on the human condition? You've heard me in the last couple of years talking about, well, wait a second, they've, long before all that stuff rolled out, they'd modeled it all out. I mean, they've got quantum computing. So and they've run war game scenarios in military industrial complex for decades. So they know exactly how to push and leverage the human condition and human reaction and behaviors. And they know this very well. And so when you understand that level, you understand where not to swim in a dirty lake and pull away from certain things that can lead you into being basically stereotyped or typecast. And that's one thing that's very prevalent, that if you don't go along with the narrative, all of a sudden and your skin color is white, then obviously you're white supremacist or whatever. And it's astounding that even if you have an absolutely exemplary character, or which to all degree we're all broken at some level and dealing with some kind of trauma, because the society itself runs on trauma as a human resource, right? So meant multiple levels. There's different multiple levels of deep capture, from institutionalized political deep capture all the way through to esoteric occult deep capture and social economic deep capture as well. And to some degree is where does you draw the line between going along to get along, which creates that and sustains that organized thing, or whether or not you decide, okay, well, I see these prevalent things, and maybe there's an opportunity to walk away from that dirty lake, don't swim in it, and build something new, and just don't give it the energy by recognizing it. This is one of the biggest issues of the human potential of reactions that they're counting on with creating, coagitators and movements and protests and all this stuff, because they want to bring in more control with martial law and all that kind of stuff. So you do the opposite. You go, instead of going to a centralized program, you do it in a decentralized way. I mean, look at how they're using social media platforms, right? And I just saw something this morning that's something about the Freedom Convoy stuff, which I haven't engaged in any of the deep stuff of it. But they're now, police are going to people's doors because they're making Facebook postings.
Yeah, I
right?
saw
I saw
right?
something. So, I mean, that rolled out in Australia and in Kiwi land, last year, but people getting, the proverbial knock on the door because of the draconian 1984 measures, right? So, like, if you don't like, that's what I'm saying. My whole thing I've been saying for a while. If you don't like a dirty lake, don't swim in it, right? Just the fact that's what's going on because of the legislations with things like Facebook. No, I'm done. I won't have a Facebook. I'm not going to be on Facebook because why should I go along to get along? Right? I see it all the time from alleged people who are trying to wake people up. Why is it anybody's business to try and wake anybody up? It takes all kinds to make a world, and like that uncomfortable piece of logic I just said was all consciousness is valid. So you got to allow people to step in their own crap and slip in it sometimes. Right? And is that a higher karmic thing on yourself of trying to intervene in somebody's life path, right? So there's many of those questions, and I don't profess to know the answers of it all, but it's stuff with the conditions of the world and how people are reacting. It's like, okay, well, they've rolled this stuff out since Babylon. This is just like going from Rome 3.0 into the next 1,000-year Reich of their 4.0. And at what point do people realize that certain controlled narratives is what they're there as a so-called awakening for a lot of stuff, is actually they're running on an old model of when an old control system is obsolete. And this is something I've been sharing and have been swayed away from making posts of this kind of stuff, is when an old system is obsolete and they have something to replace it. What they usually do is they'll use public reaction to create a crisis. This is an old game, the old order out of chaos thing, right? Of these old solar cult, death cult orders. So they'll create a public uprising, so the public then therefore gets participation, that they're the ones who have initiated the change. So you're seeing the same thing as, like I said, vaccines were designed to fail because they've got new exotic technologies of delivery systems that are now really taking leverage of the space program and the quantum states. So isn't it convenient then therefore roll out a huge weapons thing? There's so many intricate moving parts to all this, right? And then what ends up happening is creates a public outcry for something to happen. Control measures, all that is, and this should be known because they're using old military strategies. Like, again, it's really I don't have the words to describe how, like I said, is the war against the mind, the fracturing of reason and logic, the difference between how people have been obedience trained in school with bivalent logic to only focus and converge. And that's a term called convergent logic, that's used in curriculums in school, that you've let's say you've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Those are your choices, and that's your only choices. And they do the same thing in psychological testing as well, right? As they steer consciousness in these controlled ways of creating a convergence into a way of thinking. So you can't use a multivalent, non-linear perspective on a macro to create all the pieces together to see, wait a second, these are old strategies. They're old military strategies of what's also known as, in layman's terms, as the anaconda, which is, an anaconda, when it destroys its prey, it squeezes the prey and then relaxes. And then the prey relaxes, then it grips tighter. And you see this has been rolled out from the start, just in many things. So I just wanted to point that out. Just, is like, the more people can see through the reactionary states, right, then it gives people I guess more of a chance of seeing that truly the only way to actually truly affect change is don't tell anyone. Just don't participate, right? And I'll give you an example before I pass the baton back over to you. Is a great example is how people can actually vote using their spending as a form of voting. Here's what I mean by that, right? So whatever you spend on a product, right, is if that product is trending in an innovative marketplace, then that company's doing well. It's making profit because it's supplying a service or a product that people are consuming and enjoy. Now, what happened was with GMO labeling, right, was that leveled a playing field in regulatory licensing that consumers were being more health conscious. So they would start to read labels in the supermarket. And so that would give them the vote on whether or not they were going to purchase that product with their tax dollar. And if it had an ingredient that's like all chemicals that's bad for the body, the conscious consumer puts that back on the shelf. Now, did that conscious consumer go out in a protest? No. Did that conscious consumer go to lobby a regulatory state body? No. That conscious consumer had the individual choice by the vote on whether they spend that dollar on that product or not. And so what ended up happening through labeling of GMOs was there was a lot of corporations with funky chemical stuff in products that were losing profit margins out to competitors who were creating organic, healthy choices. This is a model. And I hope people can get this, that what I'm conveying here was this is how you create decentralized autonomy without ever getting involved in things. So, but again, it's because of the schooling that people have been groomed and conditioned with to use convergent logic. Most people can't see these macro, multi non-linear ways of being able to actually think this way. So the World War IV is a war of the mind. So if people start going back the way I'm going back to, Boethius and philosophers to reread stuff I haven't read in years to start figuring out, okay, well, I kind of know where these things went wrong in the past, and how was certain philosophies, and especially how that's been leveraged and tacking on occult ideologies onto this whole cult thing, such as the Great Awakening. The falsehood of the Aquarian age because the forgeries of calendar dates. There's so much we've talked about, but specifically is that whole gist of what I'm just sharing there about not liking a dirty lake, don't swim in it, is that your conscious choice is how you can gain a private independent autonomy by not participating in certain things. Now, that's only really going to work if a bunch of people start waking up to that rather than reacting to the wag the dog and pony show that's constantly being, propagandized through, weaponized rhetoric through the legacy media, but also the alternate media as well.
Yeah, so you covered quite a bit of ground there, and I just want to start with the importance of freedom as a lifestyle that begins with cleaning up from this particular model I work with in my internal arts system that I'm developing through the physical, emotional, mental body. All three of these bodies need to be tidied up. And, how you participate with the physical environment, with the world, with the institutions, and, where you vote with your feet, it's all going to help. It's all like another little brick that's part of a brick that gets built into the the bigger bricks, the bigger buildings, the institutions and things. And so you're absolutely correct. I mean, it's great that there's arms and legs and bodies showing up to these large protests to give us a bit more breathing space. And I watched a chap in an Aussie talk. He's an ex-SAS chap, Ricardo Bossi, and he makes a really important point in that, and I'm going to take it even a step further. I'm just going to leave that out. I'm going to say, okay, what the mandates go, and then what? There's other stuff going on. And so what happens next? I haven't really heard that from some places. People are coming together and that's great, but it's like going, what's their depth of understanding about what's really going on here? Because like you said, this is old school. It's funny you mentioned, I started reading Porphyry and Iamblichus last night, just out of the blue, going, I feel a connection to man, that this stuff has been lost or it's been changed. And it's the importance of this logical approach. The science of, this is where metaphysics is so crucial, because people have, like you said, if they're only focused, on the viewable, physical, obvious world, which is what everything's being shrunk down to, they don't understand the mechanics going on in the background, the macro, like you said. There's bigger things going on. And when you know stuff that has to do with the human psyche and the laws of nature, natural law, and the universal law principles and stuff, and you purposely, manufacture a sort of an environment, a scenario where the bulk of people are just like, they're just completely oblivious to how they're being managed. And, the managed, the people who are outside of the managed, how do they know they're not being managed as well? They might not have handlers or anything like this, but it's like, well, how do you know you're not playing along with something that's, it's like, down here in our capital, we've got big gatherings and that, and I've just seen an awesome photo of, so at the top of the South Island, there's a place called Picton where there's a ferry that goes straight into Wellington. So Wellington's at the bottom of the North Island of New Zealand. So it's almost like the central point. It's the biggest city in the middle of the country, right? But obviously Auckland's the largest city. But anyway, so Wellington, this thing of the sea of vehicles and things, and they're all trying to get across. It's like this campground. It's humongous. It's great. It's really good. But it's like going, okay, they remove the mandates, or they chop a couple of things off, and then what? It's great. You've got this mass movement. Now, we could just talk about so many things here. What I wanted to say, though, is, what I've discovered in my own life is that when I tried to change the outside world by changing it, it didn't work. It really didn't. It was but when I started changing, my internal environment and looking at the choices I was making, I started observing significant change. I was making choices that were far more authentic and not based on fear of punishment. And these types of things. And I realized, wow, I've actually got quite a bit of work to do. And so when I hear this concept of the great work, and I understand that, it starts at the very basic level. You've got to be reading the labels of the food. Seriously, if you're not eating proper, then your brain ain't going to work proper. Like the interface, the meaty, fleshy interface, if you're putting crap in it, it's going to mix up the information translation. And so you're going to be making choices based on, whatever you're putting in, garbage in, garbage out. And so, this is where it's like, well, what's the best I can do with what I've got? Well, organic food. Okay. Or grow your food, or, because as soon as you start, like your water, your food, your sleep, these primary needs, what's the quality level of these things? People tick the boxes and go, yeah, I've done some breathing today. I've done some I've done some shitty breathing, I've drank some shitty water, I've eaten some shitty food, and I've had some shitty sleep, but I ticked all my primary needs. And it's like, well, that's the thing is like it's not gonna elevate your awareness capacity and capability to sort of help you expand your ability to see what's going on. And so you're going to keep making choices that are essentially playing into the hands of these highly intelligent, highly resourceful, unlimited resources, these groups of people who are basically carrying and modifying the same thing. It's just getting painted up differently. It's getting cloaked in a different outfit. Through the ages, they make it time and location appropriate. That's why we've seen basically the same script, just slightly modified, especially over these last 2 years. There's been more of an aggregation of the general narrative, but they've been playing to the location, but it's all time and location appropriate. These people are master chess players right at the top here. They know exactly how to play this, and they know how to play people, and the people that think they're above it are being played. I mean, we could be getting played right now. I mean, seriously, we're on freaking YouTube, bro.
We are. Oh my God, I better watch what I say.
Yeah, you said the V word. I was going to say
party line, right?
Oh man. Okay. So Trudeau is a god. Let us all praise Trudeau.
Who?
I don't know. There's some guy. I heard him referred to as the duplicitous Ken doll by the Dark Horse podcast, the Brett Weinstein, which I quite enjoy listening to from time to time. And I was thinking, man, there's very intelligent people who are jumping ship from the mainstream centralized platforms, and they're having the level of conversation. I mean, I'm not saying these people are completely switched on, but they're getting there. The Rogans, who else? The Russell Brands, these people are starting to go, huh? You can hear it. I listen to them from time to time, but seriously though, some of it's just you guys are, you're so close, but you're still so far away. But they are helping with that awakening in a sense, Sorry, go for it, brother.
Well, I mean, everything has a role to play. So, right, it's like the Francis Bacon Shakespeare stuff. All the world's a stage. We are merely players, right? But at what degree of what are you as an actor of life portraying? And this is largely why I don't get involved in specific talks of disparaging, certain characters, or going after constantly talking about people, or rather talk about solutions and ideas and the things that I will point out, and this is why it takes the wind out of the sails of a lot of co-opted stuff, and and let's face it pisses them off, is I'll go after the behavior that they are aligning to rather than the person. Because like I said, when I realized all consciousness is valid, I'm like, what? Then all of this evil in the world, and because it all actually has a part. And some of the archetypes that these, players who are doing their thing, they're actually portraying a larger meta pattern, a term you've heard me use quite often, of basically they're creating almost like the Jungian symbolic archetypes, in which these are challenges for us to overcome. But part of the hijacking, going back to what you said about metaphysics and other kind of stuff, there's a reason why metaphysics was infiltrated and hijacked, and there's all the Hermetic philosophies and all these other kind of things into the kind of pseudo-Gnostic, pseudo-Luciferian doctrines and stuff, is because basically when that was steered away from their original teachings and meanings, it created this foundation of a separation of the cerebral rise, which is basically what I used to call Frankenstein Unbound. So people get upset at those things, but really they're inner archetypes, because those archetypes, they're all within, and this is very tough to get across unless someone can actually have a true paradigm shift of perception away from beliefs that they just believe, because belief is the fuel that requires feelings to ignite it, and feelings are chemical reactions. They're not real. So if you look at how rhetorics and narratives, that are spun through spin doctoring and all of these other things, are used as rhetorics to inflame feelings, and you also see how logic of reason and logic of the old system of metaphysics, that right before it was hijacked into the material allopathic commercial sciences to destroy and denigrate philosophy, which I always get a great kick out of. People go for a PhD, which is a doctorate in philosophy, but there's no philosophy in the doctorate, right? It's because it's part of an obedience training to get people, basically mind constructed. I don't like using the word mind controlled that often, because that again portrays a reactive feeling of conspiracy. But they're constructions, because it's all constructions. We see the world according to our, largely belief systems, and those belief systems usually come through, subconscious parts in our childhood of how we, interacted with the world, and how we got hurt as a child and stuff like that. So people, and I've dealt with this even on my own channel, and with some private stuff, is because people will regurgitate and subconsciously, behaviorally believe something and post it as something real. And I showed the other day, for an example, a thing around, chemtrails, which, and I've said this for years, right? Which suddenly paints me as the bad guy in town. But I've said, okay, well, one of the reasons why, and I'm not denying that there's spraying and all geoengineering, because that's well documented. But one of the reasons why chemtrails was labeled as a conspiracy was because in the reason of logic, and especially in legals, which legals is always open to a privatized crown thing called legalese, which is you reinterpret the definition. And because you're not a lawyer, you're not aware of some of these redefinitions. So for an example is, if you name something and you're bringing in an argument in a legal position to try to make an at-law argument, then the burden of proof is on you. So if you call it a chemtrail, you've already lost. But if you call it what it is, a jet trail, because you can see that it's coming out of the back of a jet, you've got a legal argument that jet trails are, interfering with stuff. Now, I'm just using this as just a simple example. There'll be people who, again, who's so invested in the word chemtrail will trigger them. But this is one of the things of why I will go after larger macro meta patterns of behavior to show that this is how we're all being leveraged, all of us. And they know this is how the tricksters do it. They know this system so well, of being able to leverage behavioral reactions of feelings to something, so that we're not using the original reasons through, and this is one of the reasons I was going back to, the last week I've been going over the constellation, which was the foundation of the four arts, which was then created into what was known as the quadrivium, right? Because Boethius, when he created the constellation of what became the foundation of the liberal arts of, mathematics, logic, reason, and music and geometry. Well, the reason he came, with these things was because he was facing his own mortality. He was awaiting a prison sentence to be executed by the king. And so his greater need to share this information, because he was aware of his own death, was why he created the foundation cornerstone, which then became the foundation cornerstone for a lot of philosophy and reasons of logic. Not only that, was also the cornerstones of geometry and music. Right. So I'm doing that because I'm doing a video series. I'm going to be putting up content on my channel and stuff soon. Right. But then you look at how then that therefore got infiltrated and then taken over by certain occult orders who saw that the transition of wanting to transition that knowledge after death or beyond death created another break off alternate thing of trying to ascend as God, as a God, and transcend death itself. And this is one of the foundation origins of what we're all facing today, is a global assimilation into transhumanism, which ultimately what that was, it was a perversion of Gnosticism, and even, dare I say, a perversion of even Luciferianism. In all these foundations. So what I've been doing is I'm revisiting old content that I went over years ago, to start to make correlations into, okay, if these are the game plans, and I'll give you a quick example. One of the reasons for the attack, and rightly so, I mean, it's corrupt to the core, is big pharma. One of the reasons the attack on all these things is you get all these alternate people who are just popping up out of the woodwork to oppose the big pharma system. But like I said, it's almost like it's looking like, if you know strategy over time, it's looking like it's set up to fail. So therefore, what's the alternate delivery platforms other than having a physical injection or a physical, pill or whatever? Well, what if it's energetic? If we start looking into other things, and now you told me I'm on YouTube, and there's a bunch of stuff I can't say. So, perhaps on, Telegram or something, we could mention those things. But I've been looking into going back to what the military defense contract stuff is sharing about certain, frequency, because I know a lot about frequency, and that fascinates me, that the subject. So there's things out there that's, like I said, is the general public's mostly not aware of disruptive innovation. Phil, we talked a couple of years ago on this very topic about disruptive innovation, and I was mentioning how they were going to change, they were changing the calibration of the SI units and changing the length of the second, which changes hertz waves and frequency, and which upsets the calibration. Do you remember that time we had a talk about the calibration? I was sharing about how it's like a slinky. The number metric stays the same, but it would no longer line up to previous measured calibrations of phenomenon. Well, this is where I'm going with this. Is there's an entire whole hidden, basically shadow economic system around shelving innovations that can disrupt markets. And so there's exotic technology that's been around for a very long time. And because it can upset the market share of a ruling corporate R&D budget, or their valuation of their company, then they're usually shelved, and then they're bid on by competitors to not let that innovation see the light of day. So I'm suggesting that there's technologies available that boggle the mind so much that you don't need a delivery system from a needle anymore.
Right. So what do you think it is then? It's about, sorry, I just want to jump in and say, look, for me, it's like I'm looking at things and I'm talking to people on the street, and it's just this.
Circuits.
It's passive acquiescence. It's almost like there's no resistance in the circuit system that's being built. So what you have is that you have all these nodes which are all, connectable. They're all conductive because they're all just saying yes, and so that makes a good circuit, doesn't it? The problem is that you've got all these resistance. I mean, you think about the words, and I wanted to bring this up too.
You're using the right terminology.
So when we use their language and we remove ourselves from etymological understanding of the original meanings of words based on things, and we start using this hijacked language form, which is words that are being basically weaponized slogans, propaganda, and things, this affects our consciousness. This feeds into an egregore, a group consciousness, or a morphic field. Those are really important words. If anyone's listening to this right now and you are not aware of what an egregore is, egregore, or it's double G's, group consciousness or morphic field, that is something to become familiar with, because these are the things that we are unconsciously feeding into and growing that affects the larger sort of human family, by the choices that we make, by the language that we use, by the thoughts that we are choosing to entertain. And just by going along to get along, like Brian said, that's like that's, if everyone just does that, well, we deserve what we get, really. We're just playing into the hands. But I also wanted to address the conversation of you mentioning about the archetypes too, because even in the golden ages, there were still bad people, but it's that shifting of the balance. What happens is that one side starts to outweigh the other, and then there's a natural self-correcting process that happens. And it kind of moves like this, there's more good and then there's more bad. And then that evens out. There's more good and there's more bad. And it just goes back and forth like this. I mean, we can view this throughout history. And these people, this soul journey, this earth school that we're on in a spiritual sort of context is like, we need the visible shadow element. It's not just enough to have it in our dreams or in our feelings. We have to have it in our actual physical environment as well, so we can actively see it, especially when people aren't taking a spiritual view on life. They're starting off at a base level at the physical. They've got their physical astral body or their physical emotional body. They're not really aware of the spirit, so to speak, because they, whatever, religion put them off or whatever. But, these archetypes of people playing out these roles is actually crucial for our personal development. And if we don't have them, then we don't have a thrust block to acknowledge that is not what we want, and then we use that thrust block to essentially push ourselves away from it and go in the right direction. We're going away from the toxic towards the beneficial. But we need to know the difference, because we need contrast, and sometimes contrast needs to be so blatantly obvious in our face to make us go, oh, duh, that is the wrong thing. I'm banging my head against this wall, and it's like, it doesn't hurt. Oh, how it's starting to hurt now. Oh, actually, I think I'll stop soon. Oh, just a few more. Bang, 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 bang. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I don't want to do this anymore. But, it can take time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a really, really, really important point you just mentioned there. And then I'm going to go over egregore again, because that's important to understand. This is basically there's that old saying, and I still to this day I've heard it before from other people, so it's not mine, whatever. I don't know where it came from, but it was something to do with an old maxim that had to do with, to know a thing dissolves its power over you in some fashion. I've heard other people, talk about that. And so the concept of that is, if you're unconscious of a thing, you're not aware of what it has power over you, because it could be the unconscious superstition of something that freezes you from going farther. So a lot of these archetypes, especially symbology, are thrown out there as boogeymen. And so because people put, so much negativity or fear or superstition into the fear of something, like, certain symbolism, you see it all over the reactionary feeling, because I'm sharing the larger behavior on how to get out of this trap for a lot of truthers who feel they're sharing the truth by reacting to posts and sharing stuff about Masons and Jesuits and all of this other kind of stuff, and symbolism, and especially gematria, which is an old con game. It's an old math swagger con game, because of leveraging the human behavior, which is understood under Ramsey theory of trying to always find hidden meaning in a pattern somewhere. So that old shell game of gematria has been used for a very long time, that all these numbers subtract this and do this, and then that has meaning. So the minute that you attach an ideology of belief to a metric, what you've done is you've obscured the metric, right? So egregore, right? Because that's seriously misunderstood, because in occult hidden practices, egregores have been used, throughout antiquity, especially within, certain lodges. But I'm sharing this, that egregores are collective mental thought forms, so they can be anything. I'll give you an egregore. Canada's an egregore.
Yeah, it's an
United
idea
States,
almost, isn't it?
right? New Zealand is an egregore, right? Archetypes, when you name a thing, right, and you give it power, because really there is no countries, they don't exist. And then that you look at the names of, like, countries, our original territories have all been changed into, these modernized, names of countries. And then what do is you pledge allegiance to a colored cloth on a stick known as a flag, as a territory. Right? I pledge my allegiance to the flag. So the flag, therefore, you look at people will go and kill in the name of a colored cloth and political ideology of a religion. So all that's what gives it strength as an astral egregore. And so if you look at the ancient world with many gods and stuff, creating a concept of a monotheistic God was basically, because it was closing down old systems into creating a new egregore system. All of this, and this is what it boggles the mind when you start getting into the whole concept of egregores, because the first thing is that people think of is, it's automatically, it's a demon, it's a jinn, it's a thing, and I got to run away from it.
That's what the Wikipedia article is saying, and that's why I'm glad I brought it up.
I see you brought it up, but specifically, this is the clear and present danger, because if something's put out front as a boogeyman, like I said earlier, to sway you from knowing a thing, then it still holds the power. How does it hold power over you? It doesn't have the power. You're the one that's feeding it the power.
Yeah.
So through your own constructive mind of belief, and this is where I won't get into these arguments between flat earth and round earth, because why is it only two polar fallacies, that it must be that and it must be that? Why aren't we in a dynamic holographic interface, and consciousness is like the holodeck on Star Trek? And so whatever you're rolling out as a reality is actually, that's what's being dynamically served to you. So yes, people see the earth as flat because it is flat to them, but also people see the earth as round because it is round to them, right? So the dynamics of the, right? And then look at the third option I mentioned, that we're actually consciousness that's being It's in a dynamic served environment of some sort. And so therefore, the logos of our belief is creating the egregore of the world to unfold. And this is why there's so many arguments back and forth in polar fallacy, polar dichotomy of trying to prove their point of view over another point of view. And there's memes online showing, different views of perception of seeing an object with the light flashing on it. From one side, it looks like a circle. From another side, it looks like a rectangle or a square.
Yeah,
and then, seeing it from the parallax view of looking at both sides of the equation, you can see that there is a different paradigm of perception. And that's much like how if you sit, and I remember, years ago at the dentist, I was sitting in an office with a big saltwater fish tank. And where the chair was I was sitting, I was looking at the fish tank, the fish swimming. And then the other side I could see. So I saw images of the same fish, but I could see two images, two fishes. And they were both different constructive worldviews. That was the eureka for me about like this whole thing of always see a third solution out of things. Always look at a paradigm, and you must have a paradigm shift by not reacting to one side or the other, but seeing things as they are rather than through the belief that what you believe it is. And that's very important because egregores, we make egregores out of everything. The dollar bill is an egregore.
the iPhone is an egregore.
The iPhone's an egregore. Facebook is an egregore. Right? So what mental constructive astral thought forms are you aligning yourself to? That's what it comes down to.
So I just want to jump in and talk about this a little bit because this topic of egregores, they're not bad things. They're just how things work. But when you don't know this stuff, and a group of people who do know, they can use it against you. This is why you have this power differential based on a lack of facts, logic, and wisdom. It starts with the knowledge gathering process. If you can only ever have limited understanding if you've only exposed yourself to limited knowledge, which ends up resulting. This is this trivium process. So you have knowledge, or you have logic, or grammar, logic, and wisdom, or knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, or input, processing, output. Okay. The input part is if you don't know about egregores, then your understanding is not going to be based on how this metaphysical concept works. And then, you're not going to, when you go to make your choices in the action, you're going to have a limited pool of options. So I'm probably getting a bit wordy here, but what I'll say is this: think about it as a thought form. Now, individuals and groups can create egregores or group consciousnesses or morphic fields. Essentially, what happens is that when you give your attention to something, and it basically creates a little form, like a little mini reservoir. And if you start putting time and attention and paying attention into it, it starts to grow. And that's, essentially what happens when you have the idea of a nation state, of a product, of an ideology or a religion, and everyone starts feeding their attention into it, and then they start bolstering it with emotional content. It starts to give it like a form. It gives it sustainability. And then, and we're all tapped into these because the human family, we share, we're all part of this this world soul, you might say, in a way. Like we have there's an egregore that we all belong to as humans, and it's an overarching one. And it's our job to clean it up as well. Like if we want consciousness to raise, then we want more buoyancy. But it's when we don't know what other anchors and the weights that are holding this big cloud down that is really screwing it for everyone. And so the people that know are wanting to keep a holding pattern in place so that consciousness does not rise, and they can keep it in that pattern by shiny things, sex, base instincts, feeding things that are of a lower nature, in a sense, that don't allow consciousness and to develop and expand. So this is where the monks and the practitioners, the true practitioners, and some people believe they're on the right path and they don't know what they're feeding into sometimes, right? But there are holy people out there who are essentially doing a lot of the heavy lifting. There's a reason why people go up the mountain and hide away in the forests and caves and things like that. And they're not necessarily all here for the human family, another story for another time. But essentially, and when you talked about monotheism, that's a classic, because what happens is that's like you've got all these people in this one sort of geographic location, and they've got all these different gods and representations of this god's for this particular human element or this human behavior, and this one embodies these behaviors. It's got, gods have pluses and minuses. They have positive expressions and negative expressions, and they tend to be more of the extremes, but where I'm going with this is that let's see, if I know how this works, if I can get all of these people with these scattered sort of like things, and if I can get them to put all of their attention into this one God concept, this one egregore. Now, I'm not saying that there is not an absolute, but what happens is you take the idea of the absolute and you bring it down to a level where you say, well, this is what the absolute is, and it's a aggregation of all of those gods you were talking about. And so it's not actually representation of the absolute. It's what we are presenting to you as, look, these pagan, heathen belief systems, they're no good anymore. Yeah, there's actually only one, and it's what we're telling you it is. And obviously, in the old days, before people learned to read, you went and saw the middleman, and he told you what God was, and you started feeding all your attention and your devotion. And if you didn't, threat of punishment, Spanish Inquisition, Crusades, all of these types of things. And so essentially, everyone's feeding their attention and paying homage and building things and putting more of their time and attention, and wait for it, their care. And care has many levels. How much you care about something, how much of your devotion are you putting into something, how present are you with something, how much do you revere something, how much do you hold something sacred. These things feed in. I study these practices. I'm looking for the truth as much as like everyone else, and I'm looking for these underlying principles that haven't got all the extra crap and dressings or cultural sort of like effluent and human effluent of emotions and things loaded on them. I'm looking for the underlying truth here. And I tell you, there's a great quote by, and it's not exactly related, but it should give an idea. There's a quote by J.P. Morgan. You think of him what you want. He says, millionaires don't have astrologers, but billionaires do. And
it was an old ancient thing of the kings. I mean, it's interesting. You put up Wikipedia, which you're never going to get the actual truth. Wikipedia, right?
Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's saying there about like associations with Enochian traditions. I mean, that was channeling demons. So again, is how they insert demonic practices in as angelic, right? So this has been part of this whole infiltration into the basically the consumption of knowledge without learning the foundation, as you mentioned, the right, grammar and logic and all of this, in order to actually sit the time and not invest your belief of opinion into it, but sit impartially and see all sides and say, okay, I'm gonna back check this, go through this. Oh, wait a second. No, this was an older infiltration. People think that PSYOPs and COINTEL and all this stuff is just recent. No, this has always been around, right? And
it's just different names for the same thing.
Right. I was mentioning quickly, because I know we're coming up on the top of the hour. I was mentioning quickly going back how I was going back on old notes and stuff and old, foundations of philosophy. And one of those old things I mentioned a long time ago was that because people thought that the Library of Alexandria was the pinnacle of knowledge. And I came from a different approach and said, no, you don't understand. That was the destruction. Because what basically the Library of Alexandria was, ready for this? That was the ancient Federal Reserve. In order for a culture to basically do trading through the original trading routes that the Menes and the Phoenicians had a monopoly on, was what they had to bring in their knowledge and culture and deposit it on file in the Library of Alexandria. So the Library of Alexandria was the original Federal Reserve. Is what they did was they monetized knowledge. So the burning of the Library of Alexandria wasn't the end of the end of the ancient. It was actually, it went much before that. So that's a whole other topic and stuff. But again, is where you're going to find that, because the whole thing is how many people actually go and travel the world. And I'm not anyone special. I don't claim to be an expert in anything or whatever, but I'm someone who, if I want to find out something about a place or a culture, I will go and spend time. I will get on a plane and actually go there and travel. And I've been doing that most of my life, is traveling and covering moss off ancient stones and looking at old worn out glyphs, and also seeing new things that's supposed to be from history way back. And it's like, wait a second, that can't be. The weathering on that's wrong, right? Those are sharp corner lines. If that was actually like 1800 years or 6,000 years old, it would be weathered, right? So that's what I'm saying, is seeing things from a forensic investigative eye, where I'm not putting my opinion of belief into the outcome as an invested interest, but seeing all the sides of things as they are, in order to actually disseminate what level of this is really true, and what level of it's actually half true, and what is actually cherry picked in order to create narratives to actually steer a larger reactive, to create a new egregore that's shifting mass consciousness and hijacking it away into, not what I call the great growing up, but what's being hijacked into a thing called the Great Awakening, which also has connotations towards a lot of the pseudo-Gnostic Luciferian stuff that I mentioned earlier. So anyway, that's a whole other topic. We're at the top of the hour. Phil, go for it. Take it from there.
Yeah. So one way that you can stop feeding into the beast is to, the beast that you're fighting, is to stop feeding it. Don't feed the beast you're fighting. And, one direct way into basically inflating and contributing to these reservoirs is through, things like a great example is a television. If you've got large numbers of people all focusing on the television, basically everyone's giving their attention to this thing. That's actually like a conduit for these reservoirs and these egregores and things like this. So, and the reality is that we're still here on the ground, and we've got to maneuver our way through this physical reality. And yeah, oh man, look, these topics are so deep. They go so deep. But what you really nailed it when you said there, what's the truth? The truth can be discovered, and it's there. But you have to, part of the search for the truth is that you refine your perceptive capabilities and your discernment capacity, so that you can actually separate what is from what is not. And that's why these old philosophical methods of, say, apophaticism, via negativa, retroduction, neti, not this, not that,
Hey, that's a great point, because check this out. How many websites and how many platforms and how many subscriber things on Telegram have the word truth in it? But yet, you want to know what I don't see in any of their descriptions about truth? How do you determine what truth is? Truth is not a set of facts. It's an invitation to have a discussion that leads you to a conclusion. So that got to be disseminated there. Is how do we come to the table of what is true, what is not true, what is half-truths, what's invested interest. It's huge. So because and this is what I keep saying with people having meetings, they got to have meetings under the mind, and in order to have any debate, you got to actually create the foundation of what type of logic you're using before you even have the debate. Otherwise, it's a constant gong show of this versus that. Phil, you've known me for now a few years. I've since day one, I've always been warning about this versus that. Get out of the polar dichotomy, right? So it really comes down to that: is there can't be any meeting of the minds until there's a dissemination on what type of logic you're using as a foundation groundwork to have an unbiased, impartial discussion in order to lead you to real facts, which will therefore lead you to the truth.
Brilliant. Yeah, great summary there. I mean, that's it. Like there's this word truth. It's become something other than what it is. It's a search for something, isn't it? It's a process. And what might appear to be something off in the distance, as you approach it, as you come around the corners and go over the hills and down the gullies and back up again, the shape changes. And but the search remains. That I have integrity. These embodiments of these noble sorts of frames of mind. So, I this is what I want. I want it with all my heart. I'm not, lies and half truths and these comfortable kinds of like you said, the gong show. It's just really, I mean, if you don't have an agreement on the let's get to the truth, and but it just ends up being some kind of dialectic where it's just back and it's a game of tennis that's not even, the rules are flimsy and it's just about it's just a show. That doesn't go anywhere. It's just like, well, this is actually where this kind of conversation is so important, because we want the human family to raise the bar. We're trying to help the family raise the bar by having uncomfortable things and challenging people. Because I mean, I check out various groups and that on the net, and they're still harping on about the same stuff. And like you said, how do you get there? Where's the way to get to the thing that doesn't have all the flowery language and the bullshit that takes you off on other engine? And don't get me wrong, sometimes you got to wander off on a side road to go, well, that's not the way to go. And then you come back. Right. But it's the
journey of the alchemist. Right? Journey of the alchemist is you go seeking all over the place just to come right back from where you started.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a key point that was missing out of all that whole learning of the original ancient educations, of learning all these things and disseminating, because the ultimate question of what's innate to our very essence of our core of being a human being and being alive with a consciousness is, what am I? But people, they'll concern themselves with outside, issues, trying to save the world, that's an old Synarchy Illuminati, hero's journey trap of, sacrificing the king. It was, they used to sacrifice the king and spread the blood across the field to fertilize the field in the old Minerva Minoan, culture stuff. And so this whole concept of sacrificing yourself for the greater good, which it all leads into this collectivism that's going on. So people lose the first quest for truth, which is, what am I? And the only way to actually start to figure out what are you is realizing you'll never know. You'll never know, because like I say, is you can't step outside consciousness to observe and measure consciousness. So while we're alive, we're never going to know. And we're never going to know if we're dead, because it could be either or. There's either an afterlife or there's not. It's just like going to sleep. It says that in the Bible, is when you go to sleep, right? So we won't know, right? But here's the interesting thing is, while you're on the foundation quest, which is the alchemist journey, which takes you right back to where you started, by asking, who am I? Is start by asking yourself, who am I not? And just start there. Well, if I'm this, and I don't resonate with that. But that's the issue, is most people are very, very uncomfortable, because what's happened is they believe that their identity through what I call the three amigos. You've heard me say that term before, which is the reactive mind, the constructive mind, the rational mind, is they create that identity as them. So for example, I'm sitting here and I know that I'm conscious to a certain degree, right? Reality is like a dreamlike condition, where we have moments of waking and moments of lucidity and stuff like that. And then I know that through my observer mind, which just is and is present, always present, I know that I can observe the three amigos of the mind, the constructive mind, the rational and reactive, and I can watch how they dance and fight back and forth, So it's like, I'm aware of that. So then therefore I'm aware of my own mortality, and sense that this body and the identity of Brian T. Collins, which is an identifier, right? It's not permanent. It's fleeting. Brian will cease to exist when this body dies. So then therefore, what's the higher things, and therefore what's all the conditions within the human experience on how I could be leveraged at certain levels to fall asleep from that realization and stuff like that. And this is why I'm suggesting, if you want to find out who you are, we're never going to truly know who we are, right? But we can at least start that process by discovering who we're not. And usually that will lead to a higher realization of a paradigm shift. And it's only until we have those paradigm shifts that then you can realize, well, wait a second, look at all the reactionary things of identity that I fell for someone else's belief system, that I have to join a cause and save the world and do all these things and rise up and sticks and stones, and fight, against the man, fight against the system. Whereas, like I said at the start of this, there's a higher autonomy when you recognize who you're not, and then you can set yourself a boundary of where you place your energy. And just like I use the analogy of by you use your dollar as a voting system to back away from things that don't serve you. Likewise, you use that as a type of truth energy to what you're getting involved in, that could have larger connotations on how, the growing up process is being hijacked into a new agey kind of great awakening. So what? Everybody awakens up. Then what? Well, you got to have the adult responsibility. Yeah. So those are all things that, got to be talked of, right? In the great growing up, as far as I'm concerned, right? So I'll just leave it there. We're going over. So
thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, there was quite a bit covered in that, and I just want to say that, I think anything that gets presented to us as part of our responsibility is to test it out, and and see, is it true or not? Like, we have to have those tools, and one of those things is being able to essentially not cloud up our our sense gates, our input sensory devices with things that basically make the waters muddy, and that is the bottom sort of the bottom layer of all the spiritual practices, which is purification, cleaning yourself up. Brother, thank you so much for your time today. Now, I've just got one question in the chat here, and I'm not sure who it's poked at, but I'm just gonna ask you first. When are you going to have your next video, and where is everyone? Well, I don't know where everyone is, but maybe Brian can answer when his next video is coming out, and then I'll follow up.
I don't know. I don't really post on YouTube for obvious reasons. I don't have Facebook. I have Telegram.
Hang on, I'll create a ballot. What's the name of it? Telegram?
Yeah.
I think it's like Brian.
Yeah, Brian T. Collins. Like Telegram. It's like t.me/Brian T. Collins. Brian with an I. Right.
Yeah, I've got it right here, so I'll throw it up while I'm here. Carry on.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out some bugs in the system to be able to. I want to do live streams from Telegram and stuff. I see other people doing it. What's different about me is I want to be able to, the computer that you're watching me, or that you're watching me on right now, is the studio system, and I've got it hooked up to Studio Gear, and I want to be able to actually stream that stuff in real time, so I can start demonstrating a lot of stuff around frequency, because there's so much misinformation, and there's stuff that's just like, it's so simple, but it's just it's one of those things that's, it's good to just have that kind of tool. So I'm trying to figure out how to actually plug that in using OBS and some other things into Telegram. I know I can do it into Zoom, but then Zoom's not, it's not a platform I want to be using moving forward anyway. So yeah, so you can find me on my Telegram channel. I talk about a number of different topics on there. That's about it, I guess. If you're interested in some of my music, that's on my website, briantcollins.com. I also do specific sound sessions for very specific types of people. It's not for general public, and that has to do with, Phil, you explain it. I always have troubles explaining what it is I do with that stuff. But yeah, so basically I have basically it's like a harmonic instrument that I can help people with to release stress and emotional stuff in the body. It's my easiest way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Like, what I'll do is that I'll just quickly share a screen here. Share screen, Monty Collins, share. Okay, so Brian has this amazing instrument he's built, the Terracord, and it's
had it built unique. For me. I didn't do it myself.
So thank you for clarifying. Okay, and so yeah, I've had an experience with this and Brian's obviously somewhere deep in the heart of Canada, and I'm in New Zealand, so we're opposite ends of the globe in some ways. The globe. Am I not helping things here? If there's a globe, then if on the Earth realm, yeah, on what is it, Middle Earth or whatever. But it was an exceptional experience. I have to say, it was unlike anything I've ever had, and yeah, it was really something else. So hit them up, guys. It's well worth it. For whatever it is, just get in touch with Brian. You can get in touch with him at briantcollins.com. That's on the sheet there. Now, as far as for me, sorry, I jumped in a bit soon there. So there's Brian's Telegram channel. You can jump on there. Just start getting onto these other networks, guys. Get off the Facebooks and the YouTubes and that sort of stuff, and start exploring some of these other platforms, because you'll probably find there'll be some stuff that you're looking for there. And I also just want to say, in regards to the last question, I have some people lined up on my podcast in the coming weeks. I'll hopefully be chatting to a friend of mine who is a Fajin and Empty Force teacher and practitioner, who got me into energy healing many, many years ago, which will be very exciting, because for those of you who don't know what Empty Force or Li Kong Jing is, it's pretty crazy stuff, man. And it's very interesting because it's completely outside of the spectrum of like, this doesn't make any sense, but I've had a personal experience with a Tai Chi practitioner that yeah, it was just not all Tai Chi is the same. I'll just put it like that. And if you even just remove the word Tai Chi and start talking about the deployment intrinsic energies and the development of intrinsic energies. It's very interesting. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who has enjoyed this conversation. I'm very grateful to you all. Thank you, Brother Brian. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, yeah, guys, make sure you check us out on Telegram, really important, because that's really where things are going down. It's a really great platform. You can get a desktop version of the app. Doodly-doodly-doo. It has got some issues and we're still working through them, but it's getting better and better. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful, wonderful, amazing day. Thank you again, Brother Brian. I really appreciate you, man. And
cheers.
And we will no doubt just stick around for 2 minutes if you could, just after I end the broadcast. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day. See you then.